Harrison Ford sat at a kitchen table that had seen better decades, staring at a stack of envelopes. The silence in the room was heavy, filled only by the hum of the refrigerator, which sounded like it was fighting for its life. But as Harrison stared at the latest message in his hands, he had no idea that the universe had already started its clock. He had no idea that in just a few hours, a chance encounter in a crowded grocery store would bring him face to face with the person who would not only help him, but also rewrite the script of his entire future. He walked out the door, not suspecting that today was the day the world would finally stop looking past him and start looking at him. The storm was approaching, but for the first time in decades it wasn't a storm of hardship. It was a storm of justice. Life at home had become a series of quiet battles. His joints ached from winters spent in foxholes, but the ache in his spirit was sharper. Every month was a calculated dance between hunger and debt. He lived on a pension that seemed to shrink as the world outside grew more expensive. His hands, once steady enough to handle a rifle under fire, now trembled slightly as he reached for a letter he had been waiting for. He had hoped, prayed even, that this was the back payment he'd been promised, a small cushion to finally buy a new pair of boots or a decent meal. Instead, as he slid his finger under the flap, he found a final notice for his electricity. The bill was ruthless. He stared at the total, then at the few crumpled bills on the table. He paid it online with a heavy heart, watching his bank balance drop to a literal zero. He leaned back, his eyes resting on his old Marine Corps cap resting on a shelf. He often found himself spiraling into memories of the humid jungles and the brothers he had lost. He asked the empty room if this was the life he had bled for. Was this the freedom he was promised? The freedom to choose between milk and medicine? It felt as though he had survived a war only to be defeated by a peaceful world that had forgotten him. Driven by a hunger he could no longer ignore, he gathered the loose change from a ceramic jar, the very last of his resources, and headed to a Whole Foods in the city. The store was buzzing with the energy of a workday morning. Professionals in tailored suits hurried past him, their eyes glued to their phones. Harrison moved slowly, his tall, rugged frame hidden under a simple flannel shirt and a baseball cap. He was just another face in the crowd, a man who preferred the shadows of his own fame. Ahead of him in the checkout line stood an elderly gentleman. The man wore a tattered Vietnam veteran hat, its gold lettering faded by years of sun. His jacket was thin, barely enough to keep out the morning chill. In his basket sat the barest essentials: a loaf of bread, a small carton of eggs, a bottle of milk, and a tiny package of sliced ham. The cashier, a young man named Jordan, scanned the items with a mechanical rhythm. When he announced the total, the veteran's face went pale. He reached into a thin leather wallet, but it was hollow. Only a few coins remained in the small pouch. "I was certain I had enough," the veteran whispered, his voice thick with a shame that made Harrison's chest tighten. The old soldier began to lay out his coins on the counter. Nickels, dimes, and pennies clinked against the metal, a pathetic sound in a store full of abundance. Behind them, the line began to grow. A businessman behind Harrison huffed, checking his watch with visible irritation. The veteran finished counting. He was short. Not by much, but in the world of retail, a few cents might as well be a mountain. "I'm sorry," the veteran said, his head bowing. "I'll have to leave the meat behind." The cashier reached for the package, his face indifferent. But the veteran hesitated, looking at the milk. He began a mental tug-of-war, trying to decide which basic necessity he could live without. His hands started to shake, the same tremor Harrison felt in his own soul. "Take the milk back, too," the veteran finally said, his voice cracking. "Just the bread and the eggs. That will have to do." At that moment, someone in the back of the line made a snide comment about people wasting time. Harrison felt a flash of the old fire in his veins. He didn't see a man struggling with change. He saw a hero being humiliated for the price of a gallon of milk. This wasn't about a lack of planning. It was about a country failing a man who had given it everything. Harrison stepped forward, placing his own items, a bag of dark roast coffee and a morning paper, directly behind the veteran's groceries. "Keep it all there," Harrison said, his voice low but carrying that unmistakable authority that had commanded screens for decades. "Scan everything together, his items and mine." The cashier paused, looking up in surprise. The veteran turned around, his eyes wide and clouded with confusion. "Sir, please, I can't let you do that," the veteran stammered. Harrison offered a small, tired smile, the kind one soldier gives another. "You aren't letting me do anything. I'm just paying for my coffee. It just so happens your groceries are in the way. It's a single transaction now. Let's not overcomplicate it." "But I have no way to pay you back," the man insisted, his lip trembling. "I didn't ask for a payment," Harrison replied gently. "I'm just a neighbor helping a neighbor. We're in this line together." The store went strangely quiet. The businessman who had been complaining suddenly looked at the floor, shifted his weight, and stayed silent. The veteran stood there, his hands finally still, as the weight of his struggle was lifted by a stranger who understood that some debts can never be repaid with money. The air in the Whole Foods had shifted. The cold, sterile hum of the refrigerators and the impatient tapping of feet had vanished, replaced by a thick, heavy silence. Jordan, the young cashier, stood frozen with a loaf of bread in one hand. He looked at Harrison Ford, then back at the veteran, his eyes widening as the realization hit him like a physical wave. He didn't say a word. He simply scanned the remaining items, the milk, the ham, with a newfound quiet reverence. The card reader chimed, signaling the transaction was complete. As Harrison took back his card, he turned his body fully toward the older man, ignoring the crowd that was now beginning to gather at the edges of the aisle. "Which unit?" Harrison asked, his voice steady and respectful. The veteran, still blinking back tears of confusion, stood a little straighter, a reflex from a lifetime ago. "Army, 1st Infantry Division, Vietnam, 68 to 70. Harrison gave a short, solemn nod. "Thank you for your service, soldier. Truly." The man opened his mouth to protest again, to offer an apology for the trouble, but Harrison raised a hand. "Take your groceries. Go home and have a decent meal. That's the only thank you I need." As the veteran took his receipt, he finally looked up, really looking into the eyes of the man standing before him. He saw the rugged lines of a face he had seen on giant screens for half a century. The recognition was slow, a flickering light that suddenly turned into a roar. Are you Harrison Ford?" the veteran whispered, his voice trembling. Harrison gave a modest, lopsided shrug. "Just a guy who needs his morning coffee. Nothing more." The veteran's eyes overflowed. "I can't believe it. I mean, thank you. Not just for the food, but for everything. When I came back from the war, the world wasn't kind. It felt like nobody cared, but I'd sit in those dark theaters and watch you. You reminded me that a man could be broken and still stand up. You gave me a reason to keep my head high when the rest of the world wanted me to look down." Harrison's expression softened, the Hollywood mask slipping to reveal genuine emotion. "I just played the part of a hero, sir. You actually lived it. What you did in those 2 years matters infinitely more than anything I've ever done in front of a camera." The people in the neighboring lines had stopped. The businessman who had been huffing only minutes ago now stood with his head bowed, his face flushed with a deep, burning shame. He looked at his expensive leather shoes, unable to meet the veteran's eyes. Then the silence broke. The woman standing behind Harrison, who had been quietly watching, stepped forward. She didn't say a word, but she reached into her purse, pulled out a bill, and pressed it into the veteran's weathered palm. "My brother never made it back from Da Nang," she whispered, her voice thick. "Please, for his sake, take this for next week." It was as if a dam had burst. The businessman, moved by a sudden sharp prick of conscience, reached for his wallet and pulled out a stack of bills, handing them over with a sincere apology. A young student in a university hoodie dug through his backpack and handed over what he had. Even the teenager bagging the groceries fished a handful of crumpled ones from his pocket. The veteran stood there, his hands overflowing with more than just groceries. He was holding a chain of human kindness that had started with a single cup of coffee. He wasn't a problem in a line anymore. He was a man being seen, honored, and cared for. Harrison waited patiently, a small, proud smile touching his lips. Once the veteran had carefully tucked the gifts into his pocket, Harrison reached out and grabbed the man's grocery bags. "I think we're heading the same way, aren't we?" Harrison asked, gesturing toward the exit that led toward the residential district. "Yes, sir. Just a few blocks up," the veteran replied, still dazed. "Then let's walk," Harrison said, shifting the heavy bags to his own arms to save the older man's strength. Together, the legendary actor and the forgotten soldier walked out of the sliding glass doors and into the bright Texas sun, leaving behind a store full of people who would never look at a person in a checkout line the same way again. As they stepped out onto the sun-drenched sidewalk of Austin, the world felt different. The weight of the grocery bags in Harrison Ford's arms seemed light, and for the first time in a long time, the veteran, whose name was Elias Thorne, walked with a straight back, his eyes no longer fixed on the pavement. They had only walked a short distance when Elias stopped abruptly in front of a small, vibrant flower stall on the corner. The scent of lilies and fresh earth filled the air. With a steady hand, Elias reached into the pocket containing the money the strangers had given him and pulled out a small amount. He carefully selected a bouquet of deep red roses and white carnations. Harrison watched him, a look of quiet curiosity on his face. "Those are beautiful, Elias. A gift for someone special back home?" Elias looked at the flowers, his thumb tracing a petal. His voice was soft, colored by a memory that was decades old. "In a way, yes. They're for a man named Sam. He was my sergeant. During the heavy rains in the Highlands, we were pinned down. I was young, terrified, and wounded. Sam stayed behind to cover me. He gave me his last canteen, his last words of encouragement, and ultimately, he gave me the rest of his life so I could have mine." He looked up at Harrison, his eyes glistening but clear. "I've spent a lot of years wondering why I was the one who got to grow old while he stayed 20. I buy him these every time I can afford it, to tell him I haven't forgotten, to tell him that I'm trying to make the life he saved worth something." Harrison placed a firm, supportive hand on the old soldier's shoulder. "I think today you showed him that his sacrifice wasn't in vain. A man who honors his brothers like that is never truly alone." They parted ways shortly after, but the ripple of that morning was only just beginning. A few days later, when Elias returned to the store, he tried to pay for his items with the gift card the young cashier, Jordan, had slipped into his bag that first day, a card the staff had quietly funded out of their own pockets. But when he reached the register, the manager stepped forward with a warm smile. "Put that away, Mr. Thorne," the manager said. "Starting today, this store has established a permanent Veterans Honor Fund. Your groceries are taken care of, and they always will be. We've realized that a community is only as strong as the way it treats its protectors." The store transformed. It was no longer just a place of commerce. It became a sanctuary. Every time Elias walked through those doors, he wasn't met with cold glares or impatient sighs, but with genuine smiles and, "Welcome home, sir." The local community, inspired by the story that whispered through the city, began contributing to the fund, ensuring that no veteran in their neighborhood would ever have to count coins for bread again. Elias didn't just survive, he began to thrive. The bitterness of feeling invisible vanished, replaced by the warmth of belonging. He lived his days with a renewed sense of hope, knowing he was part of a chain of kindness that started with a simple cup of coffee and a legendary actor who chose to see the man behind the worn cap. The lesson remained long after the sun set on that Texas morning. Real strength isn't found in the roles we play or the titles we hold. It is found in the quiet moments when we choose to reach out. It's the realization that we are all just travelers on a difficult road, and sometimes the greatest thing we can do is turn to the person beside us and say, "I've got this. You aren't alone." This story serves as a powerful reminder that our true worth is measured not by the wealth we accumulate or the status we achieve, but by the light we bring into the lives of others. In a world that often moves too fast, where we are constantly told to focus on our own success and well-being, it is easy to become blind to the quiet struggles happening right beside us. We often rush through our days, eyes fixed on our own goals, failing to notice the neighbor whose spirit is flickering or the stranger whose strength is wavering. But true humanity requires us to pause. It asks us to stop amidst the frantic pace of our lives and look, really look, at the person standing in line with us. One small gesture, a single moment of genuine compassion, can be the bridge that carries someone from despair back to hope. You may never know the full weight of the burden another person is carrying or the battles they have fought and lost. To the world, a simple act of kindness might seem insignificant, but to the person receiving it, it can be the very thing that restores their faith in life. If we wish to live in a world filled with warmth, dignity, and grace, we cannot wait for it to appear on its own. We must be the ones to build it, brick by brick, through our own actions. Compassion is a choice we make every single day. Let us not wait for a grand occasion to be kind. Let us be the reason someone feels seen. Let us be the hand that reaches out when the world turns away. In the end, it is these small ripples of empathy that create a great tide of change, transforming a cold society into a home where no one is forgotten. Remember, being kind doesn't just change someone else's life, it gives meaning to your own.